The first thing Jackson Miller noticed when he woke up was the cold. Not the kind that numbed skin, but the kind that seeped into the bones, making movement sluggish. His breath came out in a faint mist, dissipating into the dim, sterile air. The walls around him pulsed faintly with an eerie, metallic sheen, the ceiling stretching high above in an unnatural curve. This wasn't Earth. He sat up, muscles protesting, and took in his surroundings. 9 others lay scattered around the smooth metal floor, some groaning as they stirred. A few were already awake, exchanging hushed words or scanning the area with sharp, wary eyes. The youngest, a boy no older than 10, clung to his knees, shivering. Jackson pushed himself upright. "Roll call," he said, his voice rough but firm. It was instinctive, the need for structure, for something human in this alien place. "Chris Logan," said a dark-haired boy with sharp eyes and a tense posture. His voice carried a southern drawl, but there was nothing slow about the way he assessed the room. "David Russo," another said, broader, taller, with the build of a linebacker. His hands clenched at his sides, shoulders squared. One by one, they introduced themselves: Noah Carter, Sam Reynolds, Elijah Brooks, Marcus Tate, Tyler O'Connor, Ben Foster, Adam Hayes. 10 American boys, abducted from different places, thrown together in a featureless room with no explanation. The door at the far end slid open with a whisper. A creature stepped through. It was taller than any of them, its frame draped in dark, layered armor that seemed to shift like liquid metal. Its face was elongated, its skin a mottled blue-gray, eyes narrow and gleaming like wet onyx. When it spoke, the words came out in a guttural snarl, but after a pause, a mechanical voice followed, translating. "You are now property of the Tarkon Dominion." Silence. Then a scoff. "Chris." "Yeah. Well, I don't recall signing up for that deal." The Tarkon turned its head slightly, as if considering something. Then, with no warning, it struck. Chris barely had time to react before the alien's arm snapped forward, striking him across the chest with enough force to send him sprawling. He gasped, curling in on himself, a raw, wet sound escaping his throat. Blood dripped onto the floor. "Disobedience is met with punishment," the voice said. "You will be tested. Those who fail will be discarded." Jackson took a step forward, instinct screaming to intervene. But before he could, the Tarkon turned and left, the door ceiling shut behind it. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Jackson crouched next to Chris, who was struggling to breathe. "Anyone know first aid?" "I do." Sam, a wiry kid with a quiet, focused demeanor, moved quickly, checking Chris's ribs with careful fingers. "Not broken, but bruised bad. We need to get him resting." David, still tense, punched the wall. "Bastards. Just picking us off like we're animals." "That's exactly what they think we are," Noah muttered. His eyes flicked to the ceiling. "Anyone else notice the surveillance?" Jackson followed his gaze. The walls pulsed faintly, a rhythmic glow running along their surface. It wasn't just decoration. They were being watched. "All right," Jackson said, exhaling slowly. "Then we need to start watching them back. For the next few days, if time even worked the same way here, they paid attention." The Tarkon returned periodically, sometimes taking one of them away and bringing them back dazed, sometimes not bringing them back at all. They saw others in the facility, humanoids, but none of them looked willing to talk. Most had the hollow-eyed look of the beaten, the resigned. The boys didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. The answer was clear. No one here had ever escaped. But humans weren't wired to accept that kind of fate. Marcus, who'd grown up fixing cars with his uncle, started experimenting with their metal food trays, testing the way the material bent under pressure. Noah, a science whiz, figured out how to trigger minor fluctuations in the biometric locks by using their own body heat. Tyler, who'd spent half his life sneaking around after curfew in a military base, started mapping out guard patrol patterns. They shared information in whispers, careful never to linger too long in one place, never to attract attention. The first test of their theories came when the Tarkon tried taking Adam. The creature stepped into their room, gesturing for Adam to follow. The boy hesitated, his fingers twitching. Jackson moved first. He dropped the tray he was holding. The clang was sharp, startling. The Tarkan's gaze flicked to him for a fraction of a second. Just enough time for Marcus to step in, subtly palming a sliver of jagged metal he'd pried from the table edge. Adam stepped forward as if complying. At the last moment, he twisted his body, throwing himself low. The Tarkan lunged for him, right into Marcus's trap. The metal shard buried deep into the alien's thigh. It let out a guttural snarl, staggering. But before it could react, David slammed his full weight into its back, sending it crashing against the wall. They had it. For a moment nobody moved. The Tarkan's chest heaved, blackish blood dripping onto the floor. Then its mouth twisted, a sneer of amusement curling over its grotesque features. "You think this matters?" it rasped. "You are nothing. You." Jackson slammed a stolen utensil into its throat. The alien choked, eyes wide, body shuddering. Then it collapsed, the metallic hiss of its last breath fading into silence. The boy stared at the body. Chris wiped blood from his lip. "So, guess that means we're past the obedience phase, huh?" Jackson looked at the others. "No more waiting. We start moving. Now." They dragged the body into a shadowed corner, wiping the blood with whatever scraps of cloth they could find. Noah hacked into the fallen alien's wrist console, scanning through its last communications. "They know something's up," he murmured. "We've got maybe an hour before they realize he's not reporting in." "Then we make that hour count," Jackson said. He turned to the others, his voice steady, his eyes burning. "We're not just escaping. We're taking this place down." No one hesitated. No one questioned. Because this was war now. The first thing Jackson Miller noticed was a labyrinth of sterile corridors and towering security doors. Not the kind that numbed skin, but the kind that seeped into the bones, with the faint thrum of alien machinery. Jackson's breath came out in a faint mist, the cold metal wall, dissipating into the dim, a steady drum in his ears. The walls around him pulsed faintly with an eerie metallic sheen. Eyes locked on him for direction. The ceiling stretching high above. Noah glanced at the stolen wrist console. This wasn't Earth. Brows furrowing. He sat up. We got about 4 minutes protesting before they noticed the security feeds are looping. 9 others Jackson lay scattered around the smooth metal floor. Tyler moved groaning as they stirred, slinking through the dim corridor already awake, like a shadow. Exchanging hushed words, or scanning the area with sharp, the guard post unseen. The youngest, pressing his body low against the floor as he worked on the access panel. Knees, shivering. A soft beep. Jackson pushed himself upright. "Roll call." And David lunged forward, his voice rough but fast and brutal. It was instinctive. The 2 Tarkan guards inside barely had time to react human before this alien found their throats. Chris Logan, black blood spilling across the console with sharp eyes. Marcus swept in behind him. His voice carried a southern drawl before it hit the floor. But there was nothing slow about the way he assessed this isn't going to work forever. David Russo, Jackson stepped over the fallen Tarkan, taller, gripping the alien rifle tighter. His hands only has to work at his sides. Shoulders slid into the control chair. One. They introduced themselves, flying over the unfamiliar interface. Sam Reynolds, he exhaled sharply. Marcus got it. Tyler O'Connor, blocks 4 levels down. Adam Hayes, sealed behind 10 American bulkheads. Abducted from different places. Jackson caught the hesitation together in a featureless room with no explanation. Noah looked up. The door at the far end slid open. Jackson felt the weight of the words settle over them. It was taller than any of them. More human, draped in dark. He met Chris's layered armor that seemed to shift like liquid metal. Chris grinned. Its face was elongated. Wouldn't dream of it. Its skin a model from his ghost, expression eyes narrow. We've got gleaming like wet onyx. Patrols heading this way. The words came out in a guttural snarl. Options. But after a pause, Marcus chewed his lip. A mechanical voice followed. Could overload the conduits in this sector. You are now property make it look like a system's failure. That install them. Then maybe buy us enough time, Chris, to get to the detention block. Well, Jackson I don't nodded. Recall signing up for that deal. Marcus got to work. Tarkan turned its head seconds later. The lights flickered, then died. Then, a warning klaxon blared somewhere in the distance. Chris barely had time to react before the alien's arm snapped forward. Jackson striking him across the chest with enough force to send him sprawling. The complex was waking up around them, curling in on emergency lights, raw, bathed the walls in a sickly glow. Shadows dripped onto the floor, like grasping fingers. Disobedience is met with punishment. His eyes locked on the wrist console. You will be tested. Directing them down the least guarded corridors. Will be discarded. Then Jackson took a step forward, heavy pounding, instinct screaming to intervene. Tyler barely had time to shout a warning. Tarkan turned and left. Patrol rounded the corner. Ceiling shut behind Plasma rifles for a moment nobody spoke. Jackson fired first. Then Jackson crouched next to Chris, the lead Tarkan in the throat, to breathe, dropping it instantly. Anyone know first aid? The others scattered. I do. Using the
Sam,
corridor walls
a wiry
as cover,
kid with a quiet,
plasma
focused
fire
demeanor,
erupted,
moved quickly,
scorching the air.
checking Chris's
The boys
ribs
moved
with careful
with
precision.
precision. Fast,
Not
coordinated,
but bruised
Chris
bad.
took the left
We
flank.
need to get him
Noah
rested.
and David the right.
David.
Jackson
Still
advanced
tense.
straight down the middle.
Punched the wall.
Firing short.
Bastards.
Controlled bursts.
Just picking us off like
Marcus
we're animals.
lobbed a stolen
That's
Tarkon
exactly
grenade.
what they think we are.
It clattered across
Noah
the floor.
muttered.
His
Then
eyes
detonated
flicked
to
in
the
a
ceiling.
flash of concussive
Anyone
energy.
else noticed the surveillance?
The shockwave sent the
Jackson
remaining guards
followed his
sprawling.
gaze. Jackson
The walls
didn't
pulsed
hesitate.
faintly.
He surged
A rhythmic
forward,
glow running
finishing
along
the
their
dazed
surface.
Tarkon with
It
clean,
wasn't just
efficient
decoration.
shots.
They were being
Silence
watched.
fell.
All right.
Elijah exhaled.
Jackson said.
That was close.
Exhaling slowly.
Jackson didn't
Then we
respond.
need to start watching them
He was
back.
already moving again.
For the next few days.
The detention block
If
loomed
time
ahead.
even worked the same way
Sealed
here,
behind thick
they
glass
paid attention.
doors. The
Noah
Tarkon
keyed
returned
into the
periodically,
console,
sometimes
scanning
taking
one of them
rapidly.
away.
It's
and
locked
bringing
down
them
tight.
back dazed.
We're going to need something
Sometimes
heavier.
not bringing them back
David
at all.
tossed a salvage
They saw
plasma
others in the
charge
facility.
onto the door.
Humanoids.
Will this do?
But none of them
Noah
looked willing
grinned.
to talk.
That'll do.
Most had the
A
hollow-eyed
moment
look
later,
of the beaten.
the charge
they
blew.
resigned.
Smoke
boys
billowed
didn't
as
ask
the blast
questions.
doors groaned.
They didn't need to.
Then fell inward.
The answer
with
was
a deafening
clear.
crash.
No one here
Beyond
had ever
them,
escaped.
Rows upon
But humans
rows of
weren't
cells.
wired to accept that
And
kind
inside,
of fate. Humans,
Marcus,
who'd
some
grown
were
up
teenagers
fixing
like
cars
them.
with his uncle.
Others barely
started
older than
experimenting
children.
with their metal
They
food
stared,
trays, hollow-eyed,
testing the way
malnourished.
the material
Some
bent under
flinched
pressure.
at the sound of the
Noah,
explosion.
a science
Others
whiz,
just looked numb.
figured out how
Jackson
to trigger
stepped
minor
into the
fluctuations
room,
in the
voice
biometric
steady.
locks.
We're
by
here to
using
get
your
you
own
out.
body heat.
For a long
Tyler,
moment, there was
who'd spent
nothing.
half his life
Then,
sneaking
slowly,
around after curfew.
one of the captives
in a
stepped
military
forward.
base. A boy
Started
maybe
mapping out
14,
dark patrol patterns.
his face smeared
They
with
shared
dirt.
information in
They'll
whispers.
come for you.
Careful never to
boy
linger
whispered.
too long in one
Jackson
place.
met his gaze.
Never to attract
Let them.
attention.
Chris
The
was
first
already
test
at
of
the
their
control
theories
panel
came when the
overriding
Tarkon
the
tried
locks.
taking at him.
The cell doors
The
hissed
creatures
open,
stepped into their
one
room.
after another,
Gesturing
Some
for Adam
prisoners
to follow.
hesitated. The
Others
boy
surged
hesitated,
forward,
his
clinging
fingers
to their
twitching.
rescuers
Jackson
like
moved
lifelines.
first.
He
Elijah
dropped the
passed
tray
a stolen
he was
weapon
holding to the oldest
The
of
clang
them.
was sharp,
Can you
startling.
fight?
The
The boy
Tarkin
looked at the
gaze
rifle in
flipped
his
hand.
hands for a fraction
Then
of a second.
for the first time,
Just enough
his
time for
expression
Marcus
hardened.
to step in.
Yeah.
Suddenly
More doors
palming a
opened.
sliver of jagged
More
metal,
captives
he
stepped
stepped
out
out from the table
Hope
edge.
flickered to life
Adam
in their
stepped
eyes.
forward as if
Fragile,
complying,
but growing.
At the last
Then,
moment, a new
he
alarm
twisted his
blared.
body.
Tyler cursed,
Throwing himself low.
They know.
The Tarkon
Jackson
lunged
turned
for
to
him.
the others, right into
Get them
Marcus's
armed.
trap.
Now,
The metal
weapons
shards were
buried
passed,
deep into the alien's
crude,
thigh.
stolen. It
But
let out a
serviceable.
guttural snarl.
The prisoners weren't
Staggering.
soldiers, but before it
Most
could
had
react,
never held a rifle before.
David slammed his
But they
full
had
weight
something
into its
stronger
back,
than training,
sending
They
it
had
crashing
nothing left
against
to
the
lose.
wall.
The
They
first
had it.
wave of
For a
Tarkon
moment, nobody
reinforcements
moved.
arrived
The
seconds
Tarkin's
later.
chest
The
heaved.
boy struck
Blackish
first.
blood dripping onto
It
the
wasn't
floor.
a battle. It
Then
was an
its
ambush.
mouth twisted.
The
A
Tarkon
sneer of
expected
amusement
weak,
curling over
terrified
its grotesque
captives.
features.
Instead,
You
they
think
met
this
rage.
matters? Jackson
It
fired
rasped.
from the front.
You are
leading
nothing.
the charge.
You.
Noah
Jackson
and Marcus
slammed
took
the
the stolen
flanks,
utensil,
covering
into
its
less
throat.
experienced fighters.
The alien choked.
Chris and
eyes
David
wide,
moved through the
body
chaos,
shuddering,
directing
Then
fire.
it collapsed,
keeping the
momentum
metallic
from
hiss of
slipping.
its last breath.
Captives
fading
fought
into
like
silence.
cornered wolves.
The boy
It was
stared
fast.
at the body,
Bloody.
Chris wiped
Over
blood
in
from
minutes.
his lip.
Jackson
So,
wiped
guess
alien
aliens were
blood
past
from
the
his
obedience
face,
phase,
chest
huh?
heaving.
Jackson
More were
looked at
coming.
the others. They had to move.
No more waiting.
Then
We start
Noah's
moving.
voice,
Now,
sharp with
they
urgency,
dragged the body into
We
a
got a way
shadowed
out.
corner.
Jackson
Wiping
turned
the blood.
Show
with
me.
whatever scraps of
Noah
cloth
pointed
they
to
could
a
find.
terminal.
Noah
There's a
hacked
transport
into
in
the
the
fallen
hangar bay,
alien's wrist console,
unmanned, scanning
If we
through
can
its
reach
last
it.
communications.
A new sound cut
They
through
know
the air.
something's up.
Heavy,
He murmured.
rhythmic.
We've got maybe
Footsteps.
an hour before they realize
shadow
he's not
loomed
reporting
at
in.
the far end of
Then
the
we
corridor.
make that hour count.
Larger than
Jackson
the others.
said.
Armored.
He turned to the others.
Armed.
His
The
voice
Tarkon
steady.
commander had
His
arrived.
eyes burning.
Jackson
We're not
felt
just
the shift
escaping.
in the air.
We're taking
This
this
wasn't
place
over.
down.
Not
No
yet.
one hesitated. No one questioned. Because this was war now. The Tarkon commander strode forward, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Its armor gleamed under the emergency lights, each plate overlapping like the scales of some ancient predator. Plasma surged along the length of its forearm blades, casting eerie blue reflections across the walls. Jackson barely had time to push the rescued prisoners behind cover before the alien moved. It was fast. Faster than anything they had faced before. Chris barely twisted out of the way as the Tarkin's blade slashed through the air where his head had been a moment before. He rolled, firing 3 quick bursts from his stolen rifle, but the commander deflected them with a flick of its arm,
sending the plasma bolts ricocheting harmlessly into the walls. David rushed in from the side, aiming for the gaps in the armor, but the Tarkon caught his wrist mid-strike, twisting until bone popped. David let out a strangled cry, and the commander hurled him backward as if he weighed nothing. Jackson moved without thinking, catching David before he hit the ground. His friend's face was pale, teeth gritted against the pain. Marcus and Noah flanked the alien, firing in tandem, but the Tarkon was a blur of motion, weaving through the barrage with terrifying ease. It lunged forward, slamming a gauntlet fist into Noah's gut. The impact sent him sprawling, gasping for breath. Jackson knew they couldn't win like this. A direct fight played to the Tarkin's strengths. They had to change the rules. "Marcus!" Jackson shouted. "Pipes overhead. Bring them down." Marcus understood instantly. He holstered his weapon and leaped onto a stack of crates, grabbing onto the exposed maintenance bars above. With a grunt of effort, he ripped loose a section of pressurized tubing. Steam erupted in a violent hiss, flooding the corridor with scalding mist. The Tarkon hesitated, momentarily blinded. It was all the opening they needed. Tyler darted through the fog, slamming an electric baton against the back of the Tarkin's knee. The alien snarled, staggering. Chris was next, driving a salvaged blade into a gap in the armor. The Tarkon roared, spinning to retaliate, but Jackson was already moving. He snatched up a fallen plasma rifle, set it to overload, and jammed it between the Tarkin's armored plates. For the first time, real fear flickered in the alien's eyes. Jackson shoved it backward and dove away. The rifle detonated. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was enough. The Tarkon commander staggered, armor cracked, blue blood dripping onto the floor. Still, it didn't fall. It locked eyes with Jackson, something almost like admiration flickering across its features. Then, with a slow, rattling exhale, it collapsed. Silence. Then Noah groaned from the floor. "That sucked." Chris wiped sweat from his brow. "Yeah. Well, at least it sucked for them more." Jackson didn't waste time. "We need to move. Now." With the commander dead, the Tarkon forces were in disarray. They moved through the complex like ghosts, using the chaos to their advantage. By the time they reached the hangar bay, alarms were blaring in every direction. Tarkon reinforcements were scrambling, trying to understand how their prisoners had turned the entire facility against them. Noel pointed across the hangar. "There. That transport." The ship was sleek, unfamiliar, but intact. And more importantly, it was open. They ran. Guards spotted them halfway across the platform. Plasma fire erupted. Jackson dove behind a supply crate, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. The rescued prisoners scrambled for cover, fighting back with whatever stolen weapons they had managed to grab. Tyler sprinted ahead, reaching the transport first. He slammed his fist against the control panel, and the boarding ramp hissed open. "Get inside," Jackson ordered. One by one, they ran for the ship, ducking and weaving through the crossfire. Chris covered the rear, laying down suppressing fire as Marcus dragged a limping David up the ramp. Noah bolted for the cockpit, fingers flying over alien controls. "I think I can fly this thing." "You think?" Tyler shouted over the gunfire. The ship shuddered as its engines roared to life. Jackson was the last one aboard. He turned, firing one final burst at the pursuing Tarkon before slamming the control panel, sealing the hatch shut. The ship lurched violently as it lifted off. Chris whooped from the co-pilot's chair. "We're flying. We're actually flying." Jackson barely allowed himself to breathe. "Get us out of here." Noel pulled back on the controls, guiding the transport toward the station's outer hangar doors. More Tarkon fighters were launching, sleek black silhouettes against the void. The first shots slammed into their hull, rocking the entire ship. Noah gritted his teeth. "Shields are holding, but not for long." Jackson turned to Marcus. "Weapons." Marcus scanned the console. "Bad news. We don't have any." Tyler swore. Chris clenched his jaw. "Then we fly smarter." Noah pushed the engines to their limit, weaving through incoming fire. Tarkon fighters closed in from all sides, plasma streaking past the viewport. Then over the comms, a new voice. "This is USS Valkyrie. We have you on our scopes." A heartbeat later, space ripped open. A human battlecruiser emerged from the void, its cannons already glowing. Tarkon fighters hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough. The Valkyrie opened fire, The first enemy ship disintegrated in a burst of white-hot energy. Then another, and another. Chris let out a breathless laugh. Hell yeah. The comms crackled again. Looks like you boys had one hell of a field trip. Jackson exhaled. You have no idea. The Valkyrie adjusted its course, flanking them as the last of the Tarkon ships scattered, retreating. For the first time since their escape began, Jackson allowed himself to relax. They had won. They were going home.